All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining. And my name is Greg Alevis, and thank you for joining the Ask Greg series. This is our 10th episode. A little bit of a change for this episode. We had advertised both invoicing and cost chargeback from the real estate modules. Got some additional work to do on cost chargeback, so we're going to actually defer that to the next session. And we're just going to focus on invoicing. The good news is that this session will be shorter. So we'll get you out to lunch or wherever you are so you can get on to other tasks. But thanks for joining. So I'll go ahead and get started now. So again, before we get started, I just want to make sure we get our guidelines down. As you all know by now, those that have been with us, we start everyone on mute. That way we minimize background noise. Anytime you have a question, don't hesitate to submit it by the question box, but we'll hold them all till the end of the session. And to do that, you just look at your control panel for the solution and basically just click on the chat box and throw in your question. Just as a reminder, how do these help you? Well, the reason that we're doing this is we want to showcase the capabilities of Archibus. We've covered it quite a bit over the previous 9 episodes. We have a lot of knowledge and experience working with the product, and we want to make sure you're aware of that. We want to help you engage other Archibus users within your organization so that they have a place to get to know the product better. We have established a library of material. You can find it on YouTube under the Horizant brand, and there is a whole topic and favorites list for just the Ask Greg series. And the intent is to help grow our community forum. So for today, we'll start with a question of the day, as we always do. We're going to focus on managing invoices and receivables, and then bring it to a conclusion. And so the question, and you'll get to see, is why would I manage invoices in Archibus? And so we'll be taking a look at that. So the topic is, how do we go about doing this? And what I've done is kind of created a scenario for us to work on, where I have created a situation where we have sublet one of the floors of our building. And in essence, even though we own the building, we are now going to become landlords and rent it out to somebody. We'll be renting out the second floor. So that means we have to be able to collect rent. We're going to be collecting parking fees. We're going to be having the client pay for utility expenses, and we'll have them pay for cleaning services, as an example. So the lease will be set to start in May of this year, as an example, and we have set up a series of recurring costs. The rent is pretty straightforward. What we're going to do is, for each year, we're going to set a fixed rate on the rent. We call that a step rent. So in year 1, it's $275. In year 2, it's $280, $500, and in year 3, it's $284, $708. And the idea is we just set that up as a recurring cost, and then we have the system generate the cost so that we can then, in this case, invoice the tenant. On top of that, we're also going to be very simple in our approach with regard to other fees. So for the cleaning fees, we're just going to set a flat rate of $8K a month over the term of the lease for 3 years. For the utility expense, we're just going to charge $10K a month. And for the parking fees, we're going to charge $10K a month as well. So again, keeping it very simple, but using the system to help generate invoices and pay for. So, what does it take to do that? Well, in essence, if you're familiar with Archibus, the first thing you have to do is generate the cost. So you would think you'd go to the invoice cost wizard, but no, you actually have to create the costs that are associated with it. So in this case, what we'll do is we'll go and identify the lease that we're managing. And we're going to look at what costs need to be scheduled. So we have the rent, the cleaning, utility, parking. We'll select all of them, and we'll actually schedule the costs to be done. The payments will be set. We'll start dealing with the month of June. So any payments that will become due in June, we'll go ahead and schedule. And now that we've set them up, we've actually got the individual costs scheduled for that month. They're all due on the same date, the 3rd of June, which is, the start date from the lease on May 3rd. And now what we want to do is go ahead and approve all of those costs here. Now, we showed this last session with respect to cost administration, but here's where we venture off and go over to a different aspect of the product, because now that we have set up our scheduled costs for this lease, what we need to do is manage the invoicing to the client in general. So what we're going to do is actually go into the invoice wizard and set up a couple different scenarios so that you can become familiar. The first chance we'll do is simply load the invoice wizard. We'll identify the costs that we want to deal with, and these are the 4 that we just created. We'll focus on the rent for now, and what we'll do is we'll have the system create an invoice record for us, and we'll link the cost to that record. So we can, of course, describe it any way that we want. And once we, input that information, we want to fill in some details. Now, good thing to remember is Archibus uses contacts as the means for getting the records aligned. So we have a contact for the tenant, and we have a contact for the landlord, in this case, the actual company. The thing to remember is that when you're setting up the data, you actually have to make sure you attach the contact to a company. So that's important aspects of setting up your data in the background. So even though we're identifying Greg Levis, we actually had to do 2 things to set up the data before we could create this invoice. So now that I've issued the invoice, it's pretty straightforward. I can go ahead and, track what's going on. So, make sure that the invoice is paid. And again, we're just using Archibus to record the fact that the invoices are paid. We're not actually collecting the money. It's an important aspect that a lot of people forget. That's the responsibility of the finance folks to take care of. But we want a record of that financial activity in Archibus so that we can make sure that we are doing all our financial due diligence with the client. So, once I set the payment date, excuse me, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and, say that the payment date was made on the 31st of May. Now, granted, we're actually in March, but for demonstration purposes, I snuck ahead. And I set it up so that once the payment's made and the balance is fully paid off, the invoice automatically closes out. So there's no further action required in this situation. Now, it's a little bit different if, we only get partial payment. But the other thing I wanted to point out is that we can actually attach multiple different costs to a single invoice. And so in this example, I'm going to start focusing on the fees that we have, and we'll create an invoice for that. So we'll go ahead and get started here. Our first step is, of course, to grab the fees for cleaning and utilities. Again, we're going to go ahead and establish the description of the invoice. And just like before, we'll send it to our point of contact. and they'll have to pay the individual in question. And remember, that's tied back to a company, which is very important. So I'll make sure that that's all set up. We build them on the 3rd of May is when we plan to bill them, and we expect them to pay by the 3rd of June. And we'll go ahead and save that information. We've created the new invoice record, and now if we go look at the invoice, we have a chance to review it and preview it before we send it out. And we see all the relevant details, and we notice that we're missing one of the fees, which is why I did this, because I wanted to show you that you can actually fix your invoice before you send it out. So what we'll do is we'll go back and grab the parking costs and assign that to that same invoice that was already created. And just to verify, once we've done that assignment, we'll go back to the invoice, we'll preview it, and we can see all 3 costs. The total of $28,000 has been now attached. We will go ahead and issue that invoice, just like we did with the rent one. And here we just make sure that we track the payments. And again, what I'm going to do is something a little bit different. We don't have to take all the payments at once. So I'm actually going to track 2 payments being made. And we'll make that on the 31st of May, and we'll start with a payment of $8,000. And again, we're working with wire transfer. And once we've updated the invoice and payment, we want to record the other or another payment. So again, we just apply another one, and can be whatever. I'll just take the balance of what we already owe. So let's say we get a separate wire transfer on the same date of May 31st. And that's the balance of $20,000 that is owed. Again, wire transfer. So we can see it's a pretty easy and straightforward process for, managing invoices. And given the current circumstances, which is the reason I did this, whether we're renting a space that we have or whether we own a building and we're not going to be using it to its fullest capacity, one of the areas you may have to get involved with is actually subletting the space, which is kind of the scenario I did here, because I wanted to make sure you knew you had a way of tracking the space, but more importantly, capturing some of the financial data around the transactions that will occur for the lease in question, so that you can bill and collect the rent and fees from the the tenants in question. Now, as you're going on, all of those invoices that are created in the system are there for you to review at any point in time, including what their current status is, whether they're open or closed and completed. And the idea is that you can look at any accounts receivable reports and aging reports that you have. And here we identify for account what invoices were generated and which ones have been paid and how much of the invoice has been paid in question. So these are some pretty straightforward, facts. So in summary, for today's session, it's important that as you're getting your system set up, you want to make sure your background data is solid. You have identified your accounts. You have identified the companies that you'll be doing business with and all the relevant contacts. Because of the way Archibus is set up, it's important those things are all predefined. Otherwise, you'll have some pauses while you fill in the blanks. A good thing is that you can create multiple scheduled costs within the system and create an invoice based on one of those or more of those costs attached to a single invoice. And Archibus provides the reports, making sure that you have followed through and the tenants have, paid their bills in a timely fashion and help you collect the revenues that you need to offset, the space that you're no longer going to be using. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions. So Kelly, we'll take any questions that may have popped in or whatever.
Hi, yeah, I've got one. Do invoices have to be created in Archibus or can they be sourced from finance?
That's a good question. I looked at it pretty closely, and my impression is that if you're going to be using Archibus's cost chargeback and invoicing product, that you want the invoice records created in Archibus. But I imagine if you sit down and review your workflow, we could be able to define a way of linking it back to invoices coming from another source of data. But at least the way I followed the process, it seemed to rely pretty heavily on Archibus being the source of some of that data. Next question.
Great. Does Archibus manage the actual finances?
Not really. Like I said, the way I've always looked at Archibus in my time is good to track what's going on with with the payments and the money's due and et cetera. But the actual collection of revenue and counting against the books, that's not the role of Archibus. It never has been. It not really should be. But it is a good source of data to make sure that things are flowing. But at the end of the day, you should be relying on your finance systems to actually handle the real money that's being transacted. Are there any other questions?
Those are the only two I've got right now.
All right, we'll hold on for 1 second. Well, if there are no other questions, like I said, this was going to be a short session. I wasn't kidding. So we'll do this again soon, but let me go ahead and what's next. So episode 11 will be the cost chargeback topic that we were going to do today. So we'll cover that in the next go round. And again, that's related back to using the real estate module to take the cost that you're tracking for leases and stuff that you're paying, and then charging them back to the various departments and organizations. That one will be Thursday, April 8th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And then as usual, we'll send out the invitations and notifications. When we're ready and finished, this video will be posted to YouTube, and it will be there for you to review with your associates. At any time, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to submit them to askgreg@horizontSolutions.com. Thank you for attending today's session. We'll see you in 3 weeks for the cost chargeback session. Have a good day.